Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We know you're taking up your lunch. We are actually giving up our lunch too, so please stick with us. For those of you who don't have the webinar up and you may be in another screen or working, this is a live interactive series. So it's the first ever 3-part series that we're doing here at InfoTrust. We're going to go through intros in a little bit. I'm going to start off with a nice comic here. But again, please dedicate the time to be engaged, ask questions. There are screens of our pictures if you want more of Chris and I, which we don't know if you do. If you want more of the slides, more of us, you can minimize the screen up and down. We're going to have multiple stages throughout the webinar today to ask questions. But the goal is, and this is something Chris and I talked about prior, is we want to make this a little bit different from hiding behind the slides and keeping it very robotic in a webinar. We want it to be engaging and hopefully bring value to your organization so you can leave your lunch hour today, go back to your team and be fired up about what you learned today. So I shared this comic today because I think it made me laugh. I came across it last week, but I think the key thing we're talking about here is advanced functionalities utilizing Google's marketing platform within the CPG space. And it's important, there's a lot of shiny objects out there, a lot of tools, a lot of thoughts and beliefs. And what we're going to try to myth bust a little bit today is what are those actionable takeaways for a CPG organization as it relates to analytics. So we're going to talk about areas around my website isn't valuable, nobody's going to it, why should I care about? A lot of things like that you probably have heard in your roles in your organizations, and we're going to definitely do some myth busting today. So with that, I'm excited to introduce myself and be here with Chris. My name is Brad Pringer. I lead our partnerships team in InfoTrust. What that means to you is I'm typically the first engagement. I understand what our partners, our potential partners, what their needs are, where their challenges are. I work with Chris and team to find out if it's a good fit, and then I set up next steps, and we kind of move forward from there. Personally, if you see me yawning today, I do have 3 children. This is during lunch hour, so that's what I'm doing outside of when I'm talking to partnerships in InfoTrust. And Chris, over to you.
Yep. So my name's Chris Vaughn. I'm the head of our CPG and multi-brand analytics team. So I work with our most complex, dynamic, global organizations in the CPG, FMCG, and multi-brand space. I also have 3 children, so I'm going to try not to yawn, but it may happen as well for the same reason Brad said. So,
yes, thank you, Chris. And before we get into this is not a sales pitch, but we think it's helpful to have the context of InfoTrust, how we operate as a business. As you see here, Chris leads an entire team focused and dedicated to CPG. So please use him today during our live questions and make it interactive. Ask the questions that you're trying to better understand so you can be a larger impact at your specific company. But a little bit about InfoTrust. We are an end-to-end analytics company. Our job is to help organizations move along their maturity framework. So where are you at in your analytics maturity? How do we help you get from point A to point B much faster? How do we bring in the muscle to help you get there? A couple of the key areas around that are data architecture and data governance. I know that's a very big factor in this space, given a lot of you have thousands of sites across the globe. Number 2 is platform integration and business insights. And the third is forecasting and data science. So we don't sell media. We work a lot with media, given that we're that neutral point of view on helping organizations drive ROI for their business. But we have folks internally here that from technical implementation all the way to advanced analytics like customer lifetime value or intraday forecasting is areas that we play. And finally, we are talking a lot about today the Google marketing platform and how things like BigQuery and Analytics 360 are such integral parts in really bringing a complex multi-brand organization to life in analytics. So we are Google certified analytic partners. We're one of Google's longest standing partners, and we're very thankful for that partnership. Absolutely. So with that, Chris, I'm going to start off. We're going to have a little bit of a Q&A where I ask Chris some really key critical questions that I think all of you that we hear from our current partners. We work a lot in the CPG space. But also, what are some of those questions that maybe you may not be asking or wondering? And Chris is going to give his perspective, not only from his 15+ years of CPG experience, but working with the largest CPG organizations across the globe. This is something that him and his team do on a daily basis. So I wanted to start out with sharing this slide, and again, please revert back to the slides if you have us full screen. I'm talking a little bit about that analytics maturity framework. And with the maturity framework, there's really 4 key stages, and this is something Google partnered with a couple different organizations to launch. It's really about nascent all the way to multi-moment. So how do you as an organization, the first question I would ask you today is evaluate how your organization is today, and then decide where you want to be a year from now. Every CPG organization, every multi-brand organization, it doesn't matter what the size, it doesn't matter how large you are, how small you are. Everybody has certain gaps in each one of these stages, but the most critical piece is to put together that action plan and have steps in place to get there and bring in partners if needed that can get you there much faster. So Chris, why don't I start with my first question for you? Tell me a little bit more about, as you think about the CPG space and this maturity framework, why do I feel like in some of my conversations and my experience with CPG background that I feel maybe multi-brand or CPG specifically seem to be more towards that nascent emerging most times? Or am I correct on that or no?
No, I definitely think you're in the right zip code there. So just as a bit of an extension of what Brad was talking about. So from a nascent, emerging, connected, multi-moment standpoint, I just real quickly to go through each stage so everybody has a good idea of what that is. Nascent basically means that a company or an organization is collecting data, but they don't really have any governance about how it's being collected, where it's being collected. Basically, they know that they need to collect data, but they don't really understand what that means for them or their organization. The next stage up, emerging, they basically, the team or the organization basically understands the value of analytics as a whole, but there's no way that they're consolidating their data, if you will. So there's lots of different platforms, especially in CPG, FMCG, multi-brand organizations, but those platforms and that data may be owned by different siloed pieces of the organization. So the data is being collected, but it's not being consolidated to where it can really be used for business case decision making. Connected is kind of the first stage of the more advanced piece of the maturity framework. So in the connected state, you're really starting to put all that data together into kind of a single point of view of your customer. And so that you're able to identify who your customer is and drive improvements in really your marketing activities online, right? You want to cut marketing waste, increase marketing ROI. At this point in the process, that's really where you start to get into being able to do that. The issue here is that you're still only kind of limiting your reporting and your insights at the marketing campaign level. You're not really getting to that more advanced analytics stage, which is where multi-moment comes into play. So multi-moment, that's where you're really starting to activate your data and use it for all kinds of awesome purposes in your organization. Things like customer lifetime value forecasting and attribution modeling, those sorts of things. With that said, back to your original question, I would say you're 100% correct that most of the organizations, CPG, FMCG, multi-brand that we work with are going to be in the nascent or maybe early emerging stages. In terms of why that is, my personal opinion is based on kind of how CPG, FMCG organizations have historically operated. You have to keep in mind that CPG, FMCG global organizations typically span over 100 countries, hundreds of different brands. There's stakeholders across the entire organization that are dealing with analytics, that are dealing with digital marketing. To make all of the decisions on a global level would be very, very difficult because those global teams don't have the insight into, at an individual market or brand level, really how to be effective. So as a result, there's never really been alignment on data stakeholders, on platforms, anything like that. And so as a result, the market the organization just kind of tends to drift along in this nascent or emerging state. They know they need data. They know they need to collect data and utilize it for some business case purpose, but there's really no consolidation of that data in a way that makes sense across the organization. And as a result, there's really no way that they're activating it for more advanced purposes.
So if I had to summarize, I think, first of all, thank you for the detail. If I had to summarize what you just said, is really sometimes the limitations in the space comes down to complexity.
Yeah.
Complexity of the organization, multiple brand sites across the globe. You don't necessarily have the infrastructure or maybe even the people or process in place to actually get from point A to point B.
And yeah, absolutely. One other thing that I would say too is that just because an organization as a whole can be nascent or emerging, and then that's typically where we see some of our CPG partners when we start working with them, It doesn't mean that individual markets or brands can't be more advanced than that, right? So we work with lots of individual brands within larger CPG and FMCG organizations as well, which are very much more advanced, more in the connected or even multi-moment in some cases. But as a whole, CPG organizations tend to run more towards the nascent or emerging kind of end of the framework, just because of those limitations you were talking about. Yep.
Helpful. And we're fortunate enough, we have over 100 people online right now. So again, thank you for joining us. I would say if I was one of those 100 people and I was sitting in a CPG organization, I would be a little freaked out, or I would start to relate to a lot of what you're saying. I would love maybe for you to summarize, working across CPG and the experience that you've had in analytics, what are some of those main challenges that those 100+ people can kind of relate to?
Yeah, so I would say, obviously the decentralization of analytics and marketing that I just mentioned is a big one. So especially if you're at a global level, because you're obviously on a global analytics or marketing team, you have a responsibility of being able to tell what your individual digital assets are doing, whether that's a website, a mobile app, or even digital marketing campaigns. Same thing on the digital marketing side, right? So at a global level, you want to make sure that your organization, your teams are spending money as wisely as possible, because you don't want to be wasting money on marketing campaigns that are ineffective. So I think that's a big part from a CPG, FMCG perspective of that frustration, that frustration point that really takes hold. Some of those, it kind of is as an extension of that, if you will. Some of those other challenges around trying to figure out what the value of websites are. So historically, CPG, FMCG websites and organizations, they don't do a lot of e-commerce transactions, right? So as a result, the sites that do e-commerce tend to get lumped in as kind of the more valuable websites. And in a situation like where a company doesn't have any e-commerce websites, those sites tend to get looked at as something that is the organization needs to have, because everyone has a website. But the websites don't necessarily get valued or seen valued by the internal stakeholders, at least at the top level, because they're not providing any revenue, right? There's no money coming in from those sites directly, and so they tend to just get swept to the side.
So you just struck a chord for me on the value of the website. So as you know, my background is in media sales and working with teams who are spending millions of dollars in media, and then they sit there and put on their other side, and they're like, well, we don't value the website, but that millions of dollars of media that they're spending per quarter is all funneling to their website.
Yep.
So I think that really is a disconnect, because you see CPG brands that I would think of never going online, but they've created a brand for themselves. Yep. They've created a reason for me to have to go to their site. Yep. So as it relates to capturing data, to me, that's maybe some of the challenges, right? Like, how are the best in class organizations in this space capturing data on their site? Because on one hand, we can say nobody's doing it, nobody's going to the site, it's not valuable. But the other hand is, if you're going to make this media more effective, you're going to understand your customers, especially in the first party and all the laws and regulations that are coming in 2020 here in the U.S. What would you kind of share with the audience today?
Yeah. So the thing to keep in mind,
avoid the trap, if you will.
Yeah.
If your boss says, why do I care about the website? Let's point everybody somewhere else.
So you hit a key point there, which is, if you are spending any money on advertising online, getting people to your website, you need to have some sort of way to tell which of those campaigns are effective in getting users to do what you want them to do on their website. The key piece of that, and kind of the big thing to keep in mind, is that Google Analytics or most analytics technologies out of the box can track page views. So the trap, as you mentioned, that a lot of organizations fall into is looking at what pages are popular on your website and what your bounce rate is, and metrics like that don't necessarily give you a lot of information about user intent or how users actually feel about your website or what they're looking to do on it. It literally just tells you your ability to have a web page or page on your website that kept a user's attention for more than a few minutes, right?
Yep.
So the kind of the first step in any sort of more advanced like data collection, if you will, in order to start proving that ROI is really to start capturing things like user activities, which in Google Analytics are known as events. I know you know. So event tracking, again, at the base level, it doesn't come out of the box with Google Analytics. You have to actually have a kind of data collection strategy in place and figure out what activities on your site are valuable to be tracked. So you're starting to look at, the actual functionalities of your website and how users are interacting with those functionalities, as opposed to just looking at things like bounce rate and things like that.
So as it relates to data, I'm working with CPG company XYZ, and I'm capturing all my data. I have my analytics set up correctly. I'm tracking events. I'm tracking buy now buttons. I have newsletters. I have subscriptions. I have recipe sites. I have a way to bring valuable data into my organization, but what do I do with it?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, let me double back real quick, because you just pointed out something really interesting that I think I want to expound on just a little bit. So you mentioned some of those functionalities that CPG organizations typically have, buy nows, right? Login and registrations, coupon downloads, things like that. So those are the type of functionalities that can really show how valuable your websites are. So think about any website you go to. Most websites, and I would say all websites that you go to, have some sort of functionality besides just content on a page that you scroll down the page, right? So there's some ways that users are interacting on your website. For CPG and FMCG organizations, specifically those that do not have e-commerce, the types of functionalities that Brad just mentioned, your buy nows, your login and registrations, things like that, those are key to track. So a goal when there's no transactions, no e-commerce taking place on the site might be you want to see how often users are signing up for a new account on your site. So you can make sure that you're as effective as possible at getting that user data about who the user is. Secondly, the ability to do buy now tracking, right? So users are interacting with buy now, light boxes, buy now, click through actions, things like that. That is, kind of like another conversion point or goal that you can look at there to get that additional user data. Back to your question though. So you're collecting this data, you're collecting user activity data, you're collecting buy now or logins and registrations, things like that. Once you have that data, there's a number of different ways you can use it. Number one, and probably the most relevant to a lot of people, especially those in a nascent or emerging state, is just simply looking at reporting in Google Analytics, right? So even at the baseline level, I said a second ago, things like bounce rate are not always actionable metrics, and there are probably better things to look at from a metric standpoint. But even at that point, the reports in Google Analytics can still be very valuable as long as you know what you're looking for and looking at. So that's key. You have to know what you're looking for and what you're looking at in order to figure out really what the performance of those websites are. Beyond that, though, and kind of taking it to the next level, for organizations who are looking to be in that connected or multi-moment stage of the maturity framework that we looked at, doing things like utilizing the data on your website in Google Analytics 360 to create remarketing audiences. So this is really key. A lot of people don't know that with Google Analytics, you can actually create remarketing audiences based on the activities the user did on your website that you can then push back into media tools, things like Google Ads or Display and Video 360 for use in retargeting those users with additional offers or messaging. So that's kind of at the baseline level of that advanced connected moment from a maturity standpoint. The kind of second point that I would say there is being able to take your GA data and combine it with data from other disparate sources. So if we, again, reference back to that maturity framework, and I'm glad we started with that because it's really level sets kind of the conversation across the board. But going back and thinking about that, when you get to that connected state, that's when you start combining data sources into that single customer view. So you're no longer simply thinking about users in terms of what they did in GA and then what they did over here on Facebook or on YouTube or any of those other platforms, right? Being able to consolidate all that data in a single data warehouse, such as Google's own tool, BigQuery, that's kind of the starting point for that next step of being able to chop up data and do some advanced analytics, predictive work, forecasting, that sort of thing.
I'm really glad you brought up that last topic around, because, you know, again, the topic of our conversation was advanced analytics, but I think it's helpful to walk through how you get there, because we both agree that we feel a lot of CPG organizations are at more of that nascent to emerging level. There are some that are actually doing very well, but we want to really help the audience understand what are the steps that you put into place, and really what are some actionable key takeaways more from the advanced analytics of how you can leave today's session, go inside your organization, put together the steps to start using things like BigQuery and Analytics 360. Because a bit on my end, you know, as I think about our 3-part series today with retail, CPG, and news and media, which are our 3 big verticals, you hear a lot about BigQuery. You hear a lot about Analytics 360 in the retail space and in other verticals. When it comes to CPG, it seems like a lot of the conversations are around, hey, we need an audit implementation, or hey, we need a data infrastructure. So hearing you say that, it's good, it's refreshing, I think, for organizations that are using it today. And I think there's exciting things that you have to share with us today as far as takeaways.
Yeah. So here in a few minutes, we have some use cases that we can go through, which will give a little bit more insight and deep dive into kind of the BigQuery use case. Also, some of those additional advanced analytics use cases as well. What I would say, though, from a BigQuery standpoint is it's obviously a more connected or multi-moment part of the funnel, right? And I would even say probably more of a multi-moment part of the funnel, or the framework, I'm sorry. But that doesn't mean that anybody should necessarily look at that and say, well, BigQuery is not valuable to me today because we're in a nascent and emerging state, right? So you said at the very, very beginning, plan for where you want to be a year from now. The fact is, with data, Google Analytics data, and any platform that you're collecting data on users and user activities, you need to start planning what that looks like and collecting that data as soon as possible. In most cases, you can't go back and recreate data collection that you're not doing that actively today. So in the case of like a functionality I was talking about, if your sites have a buy now functionality on there, or your sites have a ratings and reviews or login and registration functionality, and you don't have event tracking on it, anything that's going on right now or going on today will not be tracked and cannot be used in the future when you're going to put your data into a BigQuery or a data warehouse to consolidate with other data sources. It can't be used for remarketing audiences, because by the time you get that event tracking in place, today's already over, right? Yeah. So that's kind of the first step. I'll obviously go through some of the more advanced use cases and things we've worked on with our partners. But in terms of, if I have one piece of advice on this specific topic, it's as soon as possible. If you're a stakeholder in a CPG, FMCG, multi-brand organization, do kind of a data strategy exercise with your websites. What functionalities are there? What functionalities are your key goals or your conversions for the website that you need to be tracking today in order to, in the future, make use of that data in a way that is really a multi-moment organization?
Love it. Thank you, Chris. I think that's a good push. I mean, I think I typically come across one of 2 things. One, hey, we want to do BigQuery, we want to do very advanced, super exciting analytics, and the organization may not be ready for it. Or 2, we're nascent, we don't have to worry about that. Like, so it's either I'm afraid of this or we're not ready for this, I'm trying to push it off. I think your push was you need to start getting the data now, because that's the most important piece. Without the data, without the infrastructure, without the multi-brand, multi-country collection of data in one single warehouse like BigQuery, it's going to be hard to ever move along and gain that competitive advantage, especially in CPG when you have so many competitors and so many mom and pops creating their own brand out of their garage and on shelf right next to you when you used to have that shelf space. So thank you very much, Chris. For those of you who are hopefully done eating lunch now and put 100% focus towards us, we're going to have a little bit of live Q&A from the audience. So I'm checking the screen right now to see if there are any specific questions from the team. Looks like we have one here. Sorry, our computers are a little bit farther away, so I'm just going to read the question right here. All right, from Jake Tanner. I'm the owner of Google Analytics in our organization, but we can't afford GA360. Correct me if I'm wrong, but some of these functionalities are not available on the free version. Busted. Busted.
No, so yeah, thanks, Jake. So you're correct. Some of the things that I've talked about, and really specifically, I think the integration with BigQuery is not available on the free version. So in that case, you would obviously have to have a GA360 license in order to integrate with BigQuery. With that said, that doesn't necessarily mean that some of the other things we talked about you can't utilize on a standard version, a non-GA360 version of GA. So going back to kind of your first steps, the event tracking, and make sure you have that holistic data collection strategy in place, that's 100% available for you to do today. So even though out of the box, page view tracking is kind of Google Analytics' default, event tracking, setting up those events and really getting up and running with basic data collection is 100% available to you with Google Analytics standard. There are some additional functionalities of Google Analytics 360 that would be beneficial as you're beginning to build that kind of multi-moment framework or multi-moment maturity out. But with that said, they are not blockers to you going ahead and starting with getting those events and the greater level of event tracking in place.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think what you're basically saying is don't let analytics, because you may not be on Analytics 360 today, don't let that stop you to start putting some of these things in place.
Yep.
Maybe it's a 2-year roadmap of when you upgrade to Analytics 360.
Well, to be honest, like this is something that we get into sometimes just with data in general, right? Everybody wants to overanalyze all the data and not move until the data is perfect or the situation is just right? So what I would say is, if you're not on GA360 and you don't have, it sounds like from his question, he doesn't have the ability to get on GA360 right now, maybe for budgetary or resource constraint issues. If you're not, don't let that stop you from still doing as much as you can, because again, if you're not collecting the data today, you can't go back and recreate it later. You have to start today.
All right, thank you. Let's get another question. From Patricia, everything you said is helpful, but if I'm honest, we do not have the building blocks in place for advanced analytics. What's the first step to take on websites specifically, from Patricia?
Yeah, so I would say kind of the same thing, just kind of going back to work with your team. I think there's 2 parts of this. So number one, if you're a global stakeholder in a CPG, multi-brand organization, really look at organizationally what goals, what KPIs, what metrics are important across your organization. So even though you have a lot of sites, and in most cases, all of our CPG partners have hundreds of websites, some have thousands. Across all of those sites, though, there are common ties and metrics that make sense to track across the organization. If you're a global stakeholder at a CPG org, and I'm guessing this person works at a CPG org in some fashion, definitely start by looking at what those common metrics are, right? Because if you again have a strategy for how you're going to track those globally, it makes it a lot easier to make sure you're collecting that data in the same way across every site, which can then be utilized for comparing and reporting on business objectives, right? The second piece, if you are a stakeholder in a CPG org, but maybe you're more on the market level or the brand level, or even on a marketing team, so you're not specifically working with analytics on a day-to-day basis, really look at your own individual sites that you are responsible for. Hopefully, your global team, the global stakeholders that I was just addressing, will have some sort of a plan for how they want to track data across all the websites within the organization, and then it's really up to you at that point to start figuring out where to fit your specific site data collection strategy into the puzzle. Because again, don't let a global strategy mean that you don't have the ability or you can't do your own data analysis at the local level. Make sure you're taking charge of your own websites and your own data collection strategy to kind of get that off the ground on the local level as well.
I think just to follow up on that point, and we're going to go into some of the takeaways that you have for the audience today, but I saw that a lot in the CPG space as well, where it was, well, we can't do that on a local level because we're waiting on global, or global doesn't have the infrastructure or the team in place. So I think the push here is there's no more time to necessarily wait, especially in where we're going, where it is now, where it's headed. You need to make sure that your brands, your market that you're in charge of, that you start collecting that data and make decisions off it and make you more competitive and make you more actionable with the results.
Absolutely.
So in this part of the area, we are going to go into some actionable takeaways. And specifically in the advanced analytics, we've talked about things around BigQuery, we've talked about Analytics 360, we've talked about a lot of really good meaty questions that Chris, I think you did a great job of sharing of like how you should be thinking about this. What are the right steps to take in place? So where we wanted to end the second half of the session today is really give 3 actionable takeaways. Number one, we wanted to make sure this wasn't a hide behind the slides type of conversation. There's a lot of webinars out there. We really wanted to make it interactive, engaging. But then number 2, we want to make sure you have actionable takeaways. And, you can take some of these things, set up a follow-up discussion, or just have those discussions internally and send any questions or thoughts our way. So, Chris, with that, I asked Chris to kind of put together some specific takeaways in this space for CPG organizations. So hopefully you are still with us. Hopefully you're not eating lunch. This is a time to really go in, hone in, and engage and understand how you can bring some action items back to the business.
Yeah. So I've got, as Brad was mentioning, I have 3 really awesome kind of use cases for really advanced analytics and how, once you get your data collection strategy up and running, it can really be effective for you at a CPG or multi-brand organization. The first one I think is tremendously awesome, but also tremendously overlooked, and that's remarketing automation. So if you think back again to the maturity framework, we talked about kind of that connected piece of the framework, which is where marketing and analytics teams really start working together in order to get that entire point of view of the customer. Remarketing automation is kind of that next, most powerful thing that comes out of that. So to give you a little bit of an idea here, before I start actually talking about the example, I do want to point out that Google Analytics 360, again, you can take data, user data from what users have done on your website, create audiences, and push those out to media platforms for remarketing, okay? But
just to be clear, that's not just your own brands, but if I'm a multi-brand organization, I have brands across the globe, and I may be a complementing brand that has the same audience I have, and maybe spending a lot more money than I can start to share audiences across the 360 analytics stack. Is that true?
So in 360, you have to have it set up a certain way, and you either have to be using what we call a global property. So it has to be kind of a global Google Analytics property that's collecting data about everything that in your organization.
Okay.
Or you can do one at a market or a brand level as well. But the other piece is you can also do what is called a roll-up property. And a roll-up property, that is a Google Analytics 360 specific property. And that basically allows you to collect, it's basically the same thing, only it doesn't function as an additional tracker on your website. So you can collect data about all the sites in your market or your brand, anything that's in your same Google Analytics account, and then collect data on that. And like you said, reuse those same audiences for cross-brand, basically. So
I brought that up because I know within CPG organizations, there's a lot of brands that may not get the same love, if you will, from a budget standpoint, from a distribution standpoint. So it's not, the answer is, well, we don't really have a lot of spend. We don't really have an audience. Take advantage of maybe some of the larger brands that have more investment and utilize that to benefit your business.
Yep, absolutely.
So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. But it does kind of go into the topic I was about to talk about, though, because, when we're talking about audiences, I have to clarify that, not all audiences in any platform, but also in GA are going to be created equal. So really, in terms of remarketing automation, you have to basically consider the entire user's journey and what that looks like. So at the base level, you're really starting with looking at users when they first are researching the product they're interested in. We would call it the C category. So these users are basically building awareness about what they're looking for. In this case, I've got people who like coffee, right? So these people like coffee.
I could use some coffee.
I would agree with that. Yeah. So these people like coffee, but they haven't necessarily decided if they're going to go to Starbucks and get coffee, or if they're going to buy coffee at a vendor on the street, or if they're interested in purchasing coffee online, right? At the next level, these people are think We have them in the think category. They're thinking, they're considering purchasing a product, right? So these people, in this case, the example that I have here, they're considering different coffee options, right? So are they interested in your coffee on your website? Are they interested in the coffee on a different website? Either way, they've narrowed it down to they don't want a coffee right now, right? They don't need to go to Starbucks down the street. They want to buy coffee online. They just are trying to figure out who to buy it from, right? At the next level is the doers. These are people who are ready to buy coffee on your site online. So how are you getting those people back how are those people flowing into an audience that you can then retarget them so they come back to your site and actually do purchase the coffee on your site?
And just to make sure I'm on the same page with the audience, it's even if you don't have online presence, it could be someone by clicking a buy now and you're sending them to a location.
Yes.
You're giving them an address to go pick it up in the store. They're finding
100%. Yeah. And really, even though I used an example of coffee and purchasing that online, the goal, it's really about the conversion on your website. So if your conversion, the conversion activity that you have for your website is getting a user to sign up for an account so that you can target them with additional offers through email, then that would, obviously the funnel is kind of the same. The audience creation funnel is kind of the same, but just the activities and the actions look different. Yep.
Awesome.
So with that in mind, the reason I point that out is because this whole remarketing automation idea stems from you have to really do a good job of planning out and working with your marketing team to plan out what the entire customer journey looks like. So with that said, for this example, I've got basically a very simplistic 4-stage user journey that I'm going to use kind of for the example. The first stage is a user visits your site and then they leave your site. They don't do anything else. They have no interactions with any other conversion activities on your site. They don't sign up for anything. They don't look at any products, anything like that. They come to your site and then they leave. The second stage of this user's customer journey is they look at a product page, but it's only a single product page, right? So they think they might be interested in something, but then they end up leaving. Maybe they have to go do something else, but for whatever reason, they only looked at one product, right? The next stage in this user's journey is they're looking at multiple product pages. So at this point, they're clearly very engaged in your specific brand, your specific products, and what you have to offer. So again, they're looking at multiple products on your site. And then back to what you mentioned a second ago, in this specific case, we're not going to have a purchase be a conversion activity. We're going to have that this is a product that you would purchase in a store, in a retail store, a grocery, something like that. And so as a result, the conversion activity for this site is going to be just signing up to receive emails, okay? Because again, at that point, you want a user to sign up so that you can target them with email marketing and things like that. So let's get into the cool stuff. So there's 3 pieces of this, and I've kind of called this out already. So you have a website piece, a GA360 audience piece, and a marketing piece. And there's different things that happen in each stage of this process. So let's take the user who comes to your site for the first time. They visit the site, they don't do anything, they leave, okay? That user, if you have your GA360 audiences set up the right way, that user will automatically flow into an audience. And in this case, I named it visitor no engagement. It's basically, the audience name is basically indicating that the user came to the website, but they didn't do anything, right?
Just to call that out, you said automatic, which automation, automatic. This isn't, once it's set up, it starts to flow into these audiences.
Exactly. As long as this is set up, this visitor no engagement, there are rules in place that will automatically move users into that audience as soon as they satisfy those conditions.
I think sometimes there's perception, especially in the space of, when I did print, I had to create multiple versions for different markets. Like, it's automated because it's digital.
Yep. So with this audience, you can then, as we talked about before, you can push this into other Google platforms, Google Ads, Display and Video 360. At that point, once it's in there, you can then retarget this user with messaging that is specific to users who have visited the site but not really engaged with it. So let's say this user gets to see one of those pieces of media, one of those ads, and it intrigues them, so they click on the ad and head back to the website. So at this point, the user's on the website, and this time they say, you know what, I'm going to check out this one product, right? So this is stage 2 of the user's journey. They have now visited the site again. They've looked at a product. At this point, if you have things set up the right way in Google Analytics to where, in terms of remarketing audiences, the user is removed from the previous audience that they were in because they have now had engagement on the site, and they're moved into a new audience for basically, we're calling it engaged visitor single product. So the user is now engaged, they're looked at a single product. Again, that audience can flow automatically into ads in DV360 to where they can be targeted with ads that are relevant to where they are in the process at that point. Again, let's say they get targeted with one, they click on that ad, they go back to the site. This time they're looking at multiple product pages. The cool thing here, again, if you have everything set up correctly, you've thought this through, the user is automatically removed from the single product audience and added to a multi-product audience, where you can then again target them with specific marketing messages that are relevant to users who are at that stage in the process.
And I would just add, from a marketing standpoint, if I'm on the webinar today and I'm thinking from a marketing point of view, I'm actually willing to pay more money for that multi-product user and that consumer. So when I think about things like paid search that most CPG organizations are playing in, well, if this is a multi-product user, I'm actually willing to spend $2 per click than I am $1. So I think that's a really key part, is like treating your website visitors differently. And being able to pay more for ones that are more engaged, because they ultimately most likely buy more from you.
And it's important to note too that all this audience data is based on what users are actually doing on the website. So there's no guessing. You literally, the audiences are based on actual user activity, so there's no ambiguity as to who you're targeting. Okay, so I've mentioned a couple times where you can share audiences from Google Analytics 360. By default, you have ads in Display and Video 360. The Display and Video integration is only available to GA360 organizations. So back to the question we had earlier, that's another 360 functionality that would only be available in that case. But in either cases, you have direct integration with those tools. Now, some of you may be using other of Google's media platforms, specifically search ads or campaign manager. It's important to note that the Google marketing platform has audience sharing capabilities built in. So even though you can directly integrate GA with Google Ads or Display and Video 360, there's actually, through the audience sharing capabilities, you can pass those audiences around to the different platforms. So there should be no concern about, hey, we don't use DV360, we only use ads and search ads. Well, as you can see, you can definitely get those audiences into search ads if you need to.
And if I had to add a box before Analytics 360, as you were mentioning, I think you're going to talk about this later, but from a BigQuery standpoint, so all the other data, that's where that can sit in that data lake, and then you have that direct pipe or connection into 360, which powers everything.
So it can be done multiple ways. You can create the audiences just in GA, just based purely on website user data. But I actually love the segue into our next use case, which is BigQuery integration. So
I didn't know that. I really
I know. So we talked about BigQuery a number of times on this during this discussion, and so I think it's important to kind of highlight what is possible with BigQuery, because it's something that at the base level for a lot of analytics teams, they don't really understand the benefit of it. So talking a little bit about kind of the three purposes or the three stages of integrating GA360 with BigQuery. So the first one is the ability to join GA data with data from other disparate sources, right? So this might be CRM data. So if an organization has CRM data and login functionality on the website, they can join those in BigQuery with user IDs, right? Or maybe it's Facebook ads data or YouTube data or even data from other Google marketing platform sources. So once you have that data all in one place in BigQuery, in the data warehouse, essentially at that point you can ask more complex questions of that data. So the reporting in GA out of the box is pretty good, right? But it doesn't get to the point where you're able to ask these more advanced, more complex questions of the data that you have. So when you start talking earlier, we talked earlier a little bit about customer lifetime value forecasting and propensity models, those sorts of things. That is not going to be available to you in Google Analytics. You really have to have a tool like BigQuery to make use of that data and start getting that level of insights out of the data.
And I think just to add to that one more point is, like, typically media spend isn't only sitting with Google, right?
Exactly.
There's multiple partners that may not sync as well with the enterprise stack. So how do you bring those other ones in so you have that more well-rounded view?
100%. And then the point that Brad was referencing a few minutes ago is once you've got the data into BigQuery, you've combined it and you've modeled it, if you will, as our data science team would say, you can really export that back into Google Analytics in order to deal with these additional remarketing opportunities. So building these custom segments, reintegrating that data back into GA for additional, high-level analysis.
I just wanted to call out, this is something that organizations are doing today.
Absolutely.
In this vertical. This isn't like we're talking about retail. Like I attend a lot of webinars where they're giving retail exampals for a CPG webinar.
Right.
Like this is specifically happening in CPG.
Absolutely. I was on a call yesterday about it. So yeah. So
I think it's just important to know because I think some, it's always like, well, show me the case studies. And they're all retail. Like this is happening in your vertical today. So
great question. So 2 slides from now, I'll go into more information on that. So in terms of the types of insights you can actually get from BigQuery, keep in mind, and you see the image on the screen there of the crystal ball. Every organization dreams of having this magic crystal ball, this magic bullet that's going to tell you how your marketing campaigns are going to perform before you launch them, right? Yeah. So really BigQuery is going to be the closest thing you can get to that when utilized with some really advanced data modeling, data science techniques. To give you an idea of some of the types of insights you can get. So, and all of these, back to your point, are things we have done with CPG or FMCG organizations and not specifically with ones that have e-commerce. So that's another big point because I don't want everyone to think this is only for e-commerce, like you said. Real-time sales performance, obviously that one is more tailored towards e-commerce. Powerful remarketing and lookalike audiences. Again, this goes back to what you were mentioning a few minutes ago, being able to consolidate the data in BigQuery and then export it into GA for remarketing purposes. Very, very powerful. Identify which functionalities on a website indicate that a user is likely to purchase. So when a user interacts with maybe a specific quiz that you have or other type of website functionality, does that increase their likelihood of purchasing something or converting on your site in some way? Intraday revenue. This is going to be the example I talk about in a second, but specifically for e-commerce websites, being able to predict what is going on during the day so that you can make marketing adjustments on the fly. And then customer lifetime value. This is the golden goose, right? So being able to, even if you're not just doing this online, if you combine your online and your offline data into one place, being able to predict what customers are going to be the most valuable to your organization, that you can't go wrong with that, right? That's what every organization wants.
I've learned from our data science team, I learned this a couple of weeks ago, that a lot of people confuse customer lifetime value with the historical.
Yes.
That's a part of it, but it's more of a forward-looking is who are the customers that are going to spend the most with us 3, 6, 12, 18 months from now.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second too. So, all right, so let's talk about this intraday forecasting example because I think this is really awesome stuff. So we have a partner that you well know that we've been partners with since 2015. And they do have e-commerce websites. It's a CPG organization, but they have e-commerce websites. So for those of you not in the U.S., our big shopping day of the year in the U.S. is Black Friday. It's the day after American Thanksgiving, typically. And so it's kind of the kickoff to the holiday or Christmas shopping season. So this specific organization, we helped them put together a forecasting dashboard that they literally use on Black Friday. And what this does is predicts, all the data goes into BigQuery, and what it does is it predicts for them what their sales are going to be based on the marketing campaigns that they are currently actively running. What happens, and I'll go ahead and throw the picture up there, on Black Friday, their entire team, their entire analytics and local marketing team huddle together in a room and watch these dashboards. And so they can actually see the performance of their sales, of their marketing campaigns on their sales, and in real time they can make adjustments to their marketing campaigns to cut wasteful ad spend and to increase ad spend on campaigns that are driving value to the organization.
It's incredible. I think the war room is a very common term used in this vertical, and I think this is a perfect use case and example of using that war room to drive the business.
Yep.
I think it comes down to having the process. I'm sure a lot of folks in the organization, when you say, hey, we need to switch media, typically it's like, well, I got to wait till next quarter. This media has already been, ran, implemented by the agency. So I just think it's more than just creating dashboards, being able to move and act quickly to actually put it into place.
Yep. And then you mentioned a second ago about customer lifetime value. So because this is kind of the golden goose, I want to go into it really quickly, but you kind of hit the nail on the head when you say it's not just historical, it's also future, what the future prediction is for a customer spend. So, and that really, it's the product of three things. It's the risk that they're going to churn and not be a customer anymore, multiplied by their propensity to purchase, multiplied by what their normal spending habits are. So the product of those three, plus the historical value, as you were mentioning, of what they've already spent is really what we're talking about when we say CLV. And it's very important doing modeling like this because it can identify that if you look at what's on the screen right now, customer A and customer B, in kind of their past revenue, it looks like they're very, very similar in terms of what they would spend, right? There's just probably a 20, I can't see the numbers exactly, but it's like $30 difference, I think, or $40 difference. But when you go through the CLV exercise and look at purchase propensity and their risk of churn, you see that customer A is really the more valuable customer and the better place to be allocating marketing dollars to in order to increase their spend.
And everybody's trying to move away from last click mentality,
Absolutely.
last click thinking. And this is the perfect use case of,
Yep.
Hey boss, hey leadership team, we're spending X amount of money with partner X because they drive this amount of value to our organization.
Absolutely. So on that note, so what we get in terms of CLV, we get that data, could be just online, could be online and offline, but media campaign data, all that information into BigQuery. And then we do advanced modeling on it, and anyone can do advanced modeling who has that knowledge in order to, again, build those audiences and push them back into GA for retargeting. So the example you see on your screen, maybe you have a custom dimension in Google Analytics called membership type or membership level. And so in this case, we might call these users we export from BigQuery a high value member. And then we can actually target those users combined with what you see on the right side, other activities they've done on the site in order to target those users on a more granular level.
Awesome. I saw Optimize on there too.
Yes.
From an A/B testing standpoint, I think that for new product launches or new features, flavors, et cetera.
Yep. Data-driven attribution is kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about today, what we're doing. And I'll run through this quickly because it's kind of more, it would take a little bit longer to explain this, but in general, Google Analytics has 7 standard attribution models. And you can see the screenshot of them over on the right side. We could do an entire webinar on the 7 built-in attribution models. So what I'll tell you is that all of those attribution models are based on rules that are predetermined in Google Analytics. So last non-direct click associates any conversion to the last click that happened in order to get a user to your website that was not direct, right? Okay. So data-driven attribution is so powerful. And again, it's another GA360 functionality only. So back to the question from earlier. Data-driven attribution uses actual data from your analytics account in order to determine what conversions or what marketing channels were most important in getting a user to convert on your website. So if I forward it, this is kind of what the model actually looks like when it outputs, but it shows you obviously the darker blues are really where the stronger correlation is with individual marketing campaigns. But again, this is all built on the data that's in your account and Google algorithms. So they're actually looking at, for all the people that are coming through, converters and non-converters, what channels and what touch points were the most important in getting them to do what you were looking for them to do on the site. And kind of as a use case to this, again, this is another CPG organization. This one was not necessarily e-commerce driven. So they had other conversion activities, other goals on their website besides just this. In this case, though, DDA actually helped identify that display marketing was 2,000% more important than it was reported as being with the last non-direct click attribution model, which is one of those Google Analytics out-of-the-box models. And then the other thing with DDA that it really shows you, and we thought was very interesting in this specific use case, is the incremental impact of specific touch points. So in this case, when an email campaign preceded one of those display campaigns, it became the most important touch point in the entire user journey as getting those users to convert on the website.
Well, it helps prove, I think it's and from my media days, display was always like, what are we running all this display, ads for? And when all you have is last click, it'd just be like, well, here's what we're spending, here's the cost per click.
Exactly.
This is, well, here's why we're doing this. Here's why we need to continue investment. It's an important part of a customer's journey.
100%. 100%.
Great. So we have a couple more minutes. We did have a question come in that I just got handed, so thank you. Do you have, I'm going to direct this at you.
Yep.
They don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from Chris. Do you have any recommendations between Floodlight versus GA360 audience share with DB360? Pros, cons. I know we don't have a ton of time, but it may be giving high level of how you're working with some of our organizations today.
Yeah, so there's use cases for both, but in general, when you look at kind of, so I would say that GA360, basically if you're tagging things correctly, they can both be very useful, both kind of the same sorts of tracking functionality. So if you're setting up an event in Google Analytics 360, and then you're also setting up an event, a Floodlight tag in something like Google Tag Manager or something like that, that is set to fire on kind of the same user activity, obviously the type of data you're going to be collecting is going to be very similar. The difference is obviously with something like DV360 Campaign Manager is there are a little bit different settings on how the data is kept. So the look back window can be separate than what you're collecting in GA360, things like that. So in general, myself, I would always recommend a multi-pronged approach, and then kind of see what makes sense from a collection standpoint and from a reporting standpoint. But in general, if you at your organization level are thinking about things in terms of GA360 event tracking versus Floodlight deployment, in terms of, again, DV360 or Campaign Manager, you're already well ahead of a lot of the organizations that I've talked to. So at that point, I think you're off to a good start, and being able to really solidify the data collection strategy there around those two elements is going to be very awesome for you guys.
Thank you, Chris. And again, I know we're coming on the last minute or two, so just first, thank you, Chris, for sharing your knowledge in this space. Given the amount of, you're in the weeds of it. I'm more understanding the opportunity than kind of kicking it over to you and the team. So really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, everyone who was able to join our session today. We will share out the slides as a follow-up, but I think just to quickly summarizing a couple things that I took away from today's conversation. So number one, have a strategy. Understand where your organization is at in your own analytics framework, and be honest with yourself, and make sure that your entire team is on the same page of where you're at. And then scope out what it looks like to get to that next phase. And I think we typically recommend, like, where do you want to be a year from today? And start putting together the building blocks to get to that point. And then as it relates to Google and enterprise analytics and different platforms, there's a lot of really good features when you tie these platforms together. There's already enough complexity in this vertical, given the multiple brands and multiple stakeholders. So when it comes to like building your stack, make sure they're integrated well. We focused on Google today, but just make sure that the decisions that you're making for your organization can connect both offline data, online data, to give you a better picture of your customer and how do you reach more customers. Because at the end of the day, that's all we care about, is we need to drive our business, and we need to better understand who are the right customers for us and how do we reach more of them. So I have on the screen some upcoming resources or most recent resources. Feel free to check them out at infotrust.com/resources. We would also love to hear your feedback on not hiding behind the slides and making this a little bit more engaging, although you had to look at us the whole time, so apologize in advance for that. And stay tuned for more webinars, more series. We have our retail version, where I'm going to be joining our head of retail, Michael Loban. He's going to be joining us at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. And if you're wondering this question, what happens to the data in the cloud when it rains? Stay tuned. We can't provide the answer right now. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
See you guys.